Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf begins immediately after a Mishnah and contains no less than 4 additional Mishnayos. With the exception of the last Mishnah, the entire Daf is discussing the transfer of water or liquids from one Rishos to another, or within one Rishos while standing in a different Rishos. So we begin analyzing the Mishnah which we have just learned, which had said that if you're standing in Rishos Yachid and you move an object within 4 amas in a Rishos Harabim, from one place in a Rishos Harabim to a place less than 4 amas away, that's not a problem, that's permitted. The implication being that if you move it 4 amas or more, that would be Aser. So the Gemara notes, it doesn't say whether it's Aser D'Oraisa or it's Aser D'Rabbanan. And it also doesn't say that it has to be kept at a minimum height to be Aser. That seems to imply that if you lift it up from Rishos Harabim, lift it above 10 Tvachim, so now it's out of Rishos Harabim, then you put it down again, further than 4 amas away, that would still be forbidden. Now, the language of the Mishnah is ambiguous. It doesn't say whether it's an Isser D'Oraisa or it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Rava, however, does say that such a thing would be an Isser D'Oraisa, even though you passed it through a Malkam B'Tor. So there is 2 versions as to how we're going to compare Rava to the Mishnah. One version is we assume that the Mishnah also says that it's Chayav and that's a proof to Rava. One version is that we assume the Mishnah means that it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan and it's a proof against Rava. Either way, the Gemara points out that there is no proof conclusively either way, because the Mishnah doesn't say whether it's an Isser D'Oraisa or it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, and therefore you can't prove to or against Rava. Okay, that's that discussion. Next, the Gemara refers to the halacha in the Mishnah that said a person may not stand in Rishos Yachid and urinate out into Rishos Harabim because he'll be transferring fluid from Rishos Yachid to Rishos Harabim. So Gemara asks, we have a halacha, whenever you move something, you need to have an akira and a hanacha, that is a beginning of movement and a coming to rest. Both of those 2 things have to be in a chashav place, have to be in a minimum 4 amas by 4 amas place. And this person urinated, his akira, the liquid that began to move, didn't come from a chashav place. It didn't come from an area 4 amas, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So where is your akira from a chashav place? So the Gemara says that there's another thing which qualifies as a chashav place, and that's if you intended to move it from there or you intended it to land there. Your intent makes the chashav even if it's not actually a 4 tefach by 4 tefach place. Versus we can prove this from a statement of Rav that says if somebody throws an object and he intends for it to be caught by a dog or to land in a fire, and it is caught by a dog and it lands, it doesn't actually land, it's burned by a fire in mid-flight. So there is no landing spot of 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. It's an Isser D'Oraisa anyway, because since it fulfilled your intent, it counts as a chashav place. So the same halacha would apply here, since the person intended to urinate, and he intended for the liquid to leave his body, that counts as a chashav place. Okay, now the Gemara is interesting. The Gemara wants to know, what is the point of akira? What is the point at which the liquid starts moving? Is it when he leaves his body, or is it when it begins moving within his body? What's the difference? The difference is if he's standing on the edge of Rishos Yachid such that the exit to his body is outside Rishos Yachid, it's in Rishos Harabim, but the rest of his body is in Rishos Yachid. So the urine begins leaving from where it's lodged in the body, that's in Rishos Yachid, but when it actually exits the body, that's in Rishos Harabim, and then it continues on to Rishos Harabim. The Gemara says, Teiku, we don't have an answer to that. The question stands. Okay, next quote in the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda had said that you can't, not only are you not allowed to spit from Rishos Yachid to Rishos Harabim, but even if a glob of saliva is carried in the mouth, that's called carrying. It's like you're carrying that saliva in the mouth. You're not allowed to walk from Rishos Yachid to Rishos Harabim or 4 amas within Rishos Harabim with that saliva in the mouth. Now, the Gemara understands Rabbi Yehuda is saying that even if you didn't swirl it around your mouth and form it into a glob ready to spit, even if it's just collected in the mouth to some extent, that's still considered to be something that you're carrying. It's not considered part of your body anymore. General saliva that's in the mouth, even though your mouth is wet, you're not carrying that, that's part of the body. But once it becomes collected, then it is considered to be carrying. But you do not have to swirl around and form it into a ball. That's what it seems to say. So the Gemara says this contradicts Rabbi Yehuda in a different Mishnah. The different Mishnah is not discussing Hilchos Shabbos, but it is discussing Halaiva. It's talking about somebody who's eating figs, but didn't wash his hands. So his hands are tamei. So he's not matami the figs as long as the figs are dry. But then what he does is he realizes he has a pebble in his mouth. He sticks a finger in his mouth to take the pebble out. Now his fingers got wet. Then he touches the figs. Now he touches the figs with water. So now they got wet. But the question is that saliva that he touches the figs, is that considered to be wetness, or is it not considered wetness? So it depends. When he put his finger in his mouth, what was the status of that saliva? If it was considered still part of his body, attached to his mouth, then it's not wetness. If, however, it was considered removed, then it is wetness. So what's the halacha? Well, 3 opinions there. The Chachamim say it's considered wet no matter what, so it's tamei. Rabbi Yossi says no, it's tahar, it's always considered part of his body. Rabbi Yehuda says depends. If he swirled it and congealed it into a ball, then it's considered wetness separated from his body. Otherwise, it's considered part of the body. So Gemara says, so here you clearly see that Rabbi Yehuda says in order for saliva to be considered separated from the body, it has to be swirled into a ball. But in our case, it says you're carrying it even if you didn't. So Rabbi Yechanan says Rabbi Yehuda changed his opinion. He first said that you don't have to, and then later he said, like the Mishnah in the case of the figs, that you do have to swirl it in order for it to be considered detached. That's Rabbi Yechanan's answer. The Gemara will come back to this and say it's the only valid answer. But before that, the Gemara tries a different answer, which is Rish Lakish, who says that actually we're not talking about saliva, we're talking about phlegm. Phlegm in the throat, that's mucus that collects in the throat, that isn't considered attached to the body. That's a separate thing. If somebody has phlegm collected in his throat, so there he doesn't have to form it into a ball or swirl it around. It's always considered not part of the body. It's not natural saliva that's there. So there's a couple of questions here from Brises. First of all, we have one where Rabbi Yehuda says, and here the language has to be adjusted. The Mefarshim do adjust it. Rabbi Yehuda says whether phlegm or saliva is considered to be attached to the body unless he detaches it. It doesn't specifically say detaches it, so the Gemara wants to assume that he means detaches it. The Gemara answer is no, it's not talking about both the same. Saliva you have to detach. Phlegm is considered detached automatically. Then the Gemara brings another brayso in here. Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that phlegm it has to be detached, and saliva also has to be detached. It's not considered naturally detached from the body unless you go ahead and you detach it by swirling it around and forming it into a ball, whatever you're going to do. So this clearly shows that this is wrong. So the Gemara backs down from it, and the Gemara goes back to Rabbi Yechanan's answer that he changed his opinion. Okay, the Gemara here throws in one more halacha before we get to the Mishnah on the subject of phlegm. The Gemara says somebody who coughs up phlegm in front of his Rebbe is chayv misa. He's liable to the death penalty. Why? Because it says kol mesanai avu maves. What it means, kol masni'i, anybody who makes people hate the Torah, anybody who acts in a reviled manner, makes people hate the Torah. So somebody like that is loving of the death penalty. So Gemara says, well, what's the guy supposed to do? He's got phlegm. I mean, you have to cough it up. Rashi says it's connected to an illness. So the Gemara says, well, you can cough it up. That's not the problem. The problem is that he spit it out. You don't have to spit it in the street in front of your Rebbe. Either swallow it or spit it in a hidden, concealed manner into a handkerchief or something. But don't just go spitting in the street. That's already not appropriate behavior for a Ben Torah. Okay, we now get to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses somebody who's standing in one rishus and he's sticking his head into a different rishus. There are two rishus being rishus harabim or rishus yachid, and his head, which is in a different rishus, is drinking from a glass of some sort. And the Mishnah says you cannot do that because we're concerned you're going to bring the glass into the rishus in which you're standing, and then you'll end up transferring from the outer rishus to the inner rishus. Rishus Yachid to Rishus Rabim or vice versa. The only way you're allowed to do it is if your head and the majority of your body is in the place where you're drinking. Then we're not concerned you're going to bring it back into the Rishus where your feet are. The Mishnah adds 2 lines and says the same thing applies to a wine press. The Gemara will explain what that means. So first of all, the Gemara notes that this Mishnah seems to be going like there's the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that you cannot do something in a different Rishus in which you're standing. Because we are concerned you will bring the Kli, or the object that you're holding, into the rishus in which your feet are. The Rabbanan in the previous Mishnah said that it's not a concern. So these two Mishnayos is like a Reish and a Sefer, one immediately following the other. They seem to contradict each other. Gemara says no, it's not a contradiction. Here, because it's a drinking cup, that's something that people need. More likely that you'll bring it into the rishus in which you're standing with you. The case before was just a random object. There's less concern, and really, it's all the Rabbanon, but here the Rabbanon agree because it's a cup, which is important. Okay, now the Gemara discusses what if you're standing in a Carmelis and the other rishus is rishus rabban or rishus yachid. It's only an issur d'Rabbanan, even if you were to bring the kli in. Do we therefore say you're not allowed to drink? So Abai says yes, we do, and Rava says no. That would be a gzeira l'gzeira. There will be a decree, a rabbinical decree, to prevent you from violating a rabbinical decree. We don't make such things like that. So the Gemara says that Abai says, I'll prove my position from the fact that it says v'chein megas. Same thing applies to a wine press. Now, what are you adding? A wine press. If it's also a rishus harabim and rishus yachid case, it's the same as before. It must be that the wine press is a karmelis, and the chiddush is that you're allowed to stand in the karmelis and drink in rishus harabim, or vice versa. So Rava says, no, not necessarily. This is a totally different halacha that we're adding here. When we say same to a wine press, we're talking about hilchos meiser. And the halacha is as follows. The halacha is that you're allowed to drink and eat fruits that you didn't take meiser from, as long as it's not harvested in a set proper way, as long as it's still in an unharvested, processed manner. So the question is, if I have grape juice that was just pressed and is sloshing around the wine press, can I drink that? Is that considered processed or not? So this halacha is teaching me that you're allowed to stick your head and the majority of your body into the wine press and drink actually out of the wine press or in the wine press, above the wine press itself. This is not considered to be harvested and fully processed yet. Now we bring a Mishnah that discusses this point specifically, and it brings three opinions as to whether or not you're allowed to drink from the wine press. Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not allowed to because it is chayiv and meiser already. The Chachamim say it depends on what type of water you mix it with. As we know, to drink wine you have to mix it with water in the days of Chazal. So the Chachamim say if you mixed it with hot water, then you are definitely considered chayiv, because this wine that you're drinking in the cup is not going to be put back in the wine press. It's now hot. It's mixed with hot water. If you pour that back in with the rest of the grape juice, you'll ruin it. So therefore, that's definitely finished processing, and it's chayiv and meiser. If it's mixed with cold water, you could still pour it back, and therefore it's not necessarily a problem. You're not chayiv and meiser yet, and therefore you're allowed to drink it. Okay, next Mishnah discusses rainwater flowing off a roof. So the days of Chazal, the roofs were flat. There was a network of pipes that carried the water off the roof to one corner, and there was a drain pipe that flowed down the side of the building, and it jutted out at a right angle from the wall and carried the water away from the wall. So you have two things. You have the gutters, which are alongside the building near the top, near the roof, collecting the water, and you have the drain pipe, similar to what we have in our houses today. So the Mishnah says, here's what you're allowed to do. From the drain pipe, you're allowed to drink directly. You're allowed to put your mouth on the drain pipe or a cup on the drain pipe and collect the water. From the gutter, which is near the top, you can catch it falling off in midair, but you can't put something onto the drain pipe itself. So Gemara says why. So Rav Nachman says because the gutter is within 3 tvachim of the roof, and therefore, or by the principle of love, it's considered to be part of the roof itself. The roof is a rishus yachid. You're in a rishus harabim. You'll be transferring water from rishus yachid to rishus harabim if you drink directly from it or put a kli directly on it. However, once it is fallen and it's shooting through the air, you're allowed to catch it in your cup, because then it's already out of the rishus yachid, it's already in rishus harabim, and you're allowed to catch it in your cup. That's not a problem. Gemara brings 2 brises that support this. Brisa says you're allowed to stand in rishus yachid and raise up your hand above 10 tvachim. Again, all this has to be above 10 tvachim, otherwise you're in the rishus harabim below. You can raise up your hand above 10 tvachim to collect from the roof, as long as it's not within 3 tvachim of the top of the roof because of lavud. And you can't put the kli directly on it because of collecting from the roof. And we have a different brisa that says that you may not stand in rishus yachid and stretch your hand above 10 tvachim to within 3 tvachim of the roof. You're only allowed to do it if it's more than 3 tvachim from the roof. The same halacha, just written in the opposite perspective. Okay, now we said you're allowed to drink directly from the drain pipe. However, the Gemara says as long as the drain pipe is not 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. If it's 4 tvachim wide, then it itself is a rishus hayachid, and you're taking directly from the rishus yachid into where you are standing, which is a rishus harabim. Now we begin the next Mishnah. This is a short Mishnah discussing what happens when you have a well or a pit outside a building, and you want to draw water from the well or the pit through the window of the building on Shabbos. So the Mishnah says, as long as the pit is next to the house and it has a wall around it 10 tvachim high, then you're allowed to. The next case in the Mishnah is if you have a garbage heap next to your house, and the garbage heap is at least 10 tefachim high, and you want to throw water out of your house's window into the garbage heap, then you're allowed to do that. The reason in both of these cases that anything that's 10 tefachim high is considered a Rosh Hashanah. So you're transferring from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Your house is Rosh Hashanah. Out the window into the wall around the pit is 10 tefachim, or the height of the garbage heap is 10 tefachim, and therefore everything means Rosh Hashanah, no problem. The Gemara asks, why do I need the wall? The pit itself is 10 tefachim deep, right? So being 10 tefachim deep is a Rosh Hashanah. Why do I have to have a wall around it? So Gemara says, the question is, where is the pit in relation to the house? If it's right up against the side of the house, I certainly don't need a wall, because there is no Rosh Hashanah, there is no Rosh Hashanah between the pit, between the well and the house that you would possibly pass through. So Rav Huna says, we're talking about where there is a distance between the well and the house. There's a space of at least 4 tefachim. Now, if you don't have a wall around the well, what might end up happening is when you throw your pail out to the well, it'll pass close to the ground between the house and the well. It'll be passing within 10 tefachim of the ground, and then you have your pails really transferring into Rosh Hashanah in that moment. So your house is a Rosh Hashanah, between your house and the well is Rosh Hashanah within 10 tefachim of the ground, and then the pit itself is Rosh Hashanah. So you're doing two things, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah again. So Gemara says, so what does it help if you have a wall there? So if you have the wall, that means that the pail has to go over the wall. So it can't go below 10 tefachim. So go over the wall to get into the well, it'll never pass within 10 tefachim of the ground, it'll never pass within Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about even if it's right up against the house, but where the well itself is not 10 tefachim deep. It's only by a combination of the depth of the well and the height of the wall that we have a 10 tefach high wall in total altogether, and that's what is teaching me that the height of the wall can combine with the depth of the well to reach the 10 tefach minimum. Okay, now about the case of the garbage heap, the Gemara says, the chiddush here is that you're allowed to throw things into the garbage heap. You don't have to be afraid that one day the garbage heap will disappear, it'll get cleaned away, and people will keep throwing out the window, and they won't realize that there's no 10 tefach height there anymore, and then they're throwing into Rosh Hashanah. So Gemara says, well, that seems to be different than halacha said by Rav and Bar Avada, named Rabbi Yitzchak, that there was a mavoi that had two open ends. Well, they weren't really open. One end ended at the sea, and there was a drop-off down to the water level, and the other end ended by a garbage heap that closed off the other end. So it's really closed on four ends. Two sides have walls, and the other remaining sides, one has a cliff drop down to the sea, and one has a garbage heap. So this incident, this mavoi question came to Rebbe, and Rebbe didn't want to say that it's mutter. He didn't want to say that it's asur because it does have walls. He didn't want to say it's mutter to carry in there. He didn't want to call it closed. Why? What's the problem? Well, the level of the sea may rise near the land, meaning you may have a buildup of sediment there, in which case you'll be able to actually walk out of the mavoi out into dry land, and the sea, the drop-off will move further away from the edge of the mavoi, and therefore it'll be problematic. Therefore, it's not such a good wall there having the drop-off to the sea. As far as the garbage heap may get cleared away. And he didn't like that either. So that seems to imply that we are afraid a garbage heap will get cleared away. How come here in our Mishnah we're not concerned? Whereas this is different. Here, that was a heap of the rabbim, and therefore we're afraid that it'll, if it's a heap of the rabbim, we're not concerned that even if it gets cleared, because people will know, they'll remind each other. If, however, it's a heap which belongs to one person, so he may forget, and he may come to use it even if it disappears and it's gone, and we wouldn't want that to happen. Okay, now the Gemara, now we begin the next Mishnah, and this is off the subject of throwing water places. This is talking about when you have a tree. So the tree, the Mishnah says, can possibly form a ceiling and walls. That's if its branches spread on all sides, and the branches form a roof, and they also lean over towards the ground and come to within 3 tvachim of the ground. Then those branches also form a wall, so you can actually have a whole hut formed by the tree itself. Another halacha of trees. The Gemara says if roots come out of the ground from the tree and they stretch upwards to more than 3 tvachim from the ground, then they're considered chashav, they're considered a tree in their own right. And we know you're not allowed to sit on a tree on Shabbos, so you're not allowed to sit on these roots either. Okay. Now, Gemara, back to the tree forming walls. So it says, Yehuda, Breda of Yeshua, you're not allowed to count, you're not allowed to carry within it if it's larger than a basis time. If it's larger than 5,000 square amas, it's the size of a karfif. Now this is problematic. The halacha of a karfif is that you can't carry in an area that's that large if it's fenced in such a way that was not intended for people to live there. But here, Rav Yeshua says this halacha applies even to a tree that was planted for shelter. So that means that these walls created by the tree were made in such a way that they should be able to house people to live there, or to use in some extent. So why is it only okay if it's less than 5,000 square amas? So the Gemara answers because it's never made for you to actually live there and use that space. It's made there as a protected space for you while you're watching the fields. Its function is outside of its walls, not inside its walls. That doesn't count as a protected space for human living and using.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.